In July of 2021, the World Federation of Therapeutic Communities and the Treatment Communities of America decided to hold a joint Zoom training for all of the TCs in the United States and other behavioral health organizations who are interested. This is really kind of a first. TCA and WFTC have collaborated in the past, but nothing quite like this. I think it's really it was really remarkable and a great idea to bring together people from really all over the world to talk about, and the title of this was The Changing Aspects of the TC Model. And of course, the therapeutic community is now over 60 years old. It started in the United States, at least the model that we're talking about. The European model actually started earlier in kind of a different way, but the American TC started in 1958. So it is past its adolescence, its middle age, and should be fairly mature at this time. But of course, a lot of things have changed in our world in the last 60 years. And so what is the essence of the therapeutic community that we want to preserve? And what are the challenges and threats to the integrity of a methodology which has been implemented all over the world, and which an enormous amount of research has been done showing the effectiveness of therapeutic communities, particularly with populations that are not amenable to traditional kind of clinical counseling models or behavioral health models. So the two keynote speakers who were picked for this was, of course, Dr. George DeLeon, who's really kind of the person who's done the most writing, thinking, teaching, training all over the world about the therapeutic community model, and has a very famous book, The Therapeutic Community Theory, Model, and Method, and Naya Arbiter, who was the co-founder of Amity and currently Senior Vice President, Services and Training, and one of the most important figures in therapeutic communities today. Since Naya was presenting here at Amity, we made a recording of that and wanted to kind of present it in a different way where you could actually see her speaking, because she is an impassioned speaker, and I think it's really good both to see her slides and to see her in person, so to speak. But I hope you enjoyed this 20 or 30-minute presentation by Naya. I think most of the people who have watched it have found it very inspiring.
So, greetings, community, ladies and gentlemen, estimados señoras y señores. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak. Thank you for your work, for the thousands of people you represent, and condolences to all of you who have lost loved ones to COVID and to gun violence. It's been a tough period of time. Thank you, George, for your demonstration over the decades of whole person engagement, for mentoring both the movement and the model of the TC nationally and internationally, for encouraging us to re-envision the therapeutic community, for encouraging us to stand on our base of fidelity to the model. Thank you for the battles that you've waged to make sure that we had a research base, for your music, for your humor. Jazz is both an individual and a community membership activity. Flo Kennedy taught us years ago that you can't have a revolution without humor and music. Gordon Parks said that if a person can reach the latter days of life with their soul intact, they've mastered life. So will the TC move forward with its soul intact? Helen Luke shared that the world has not moved along so much by the battles it has won and lost, rather by the stories that it has loved and believed in. Hannah Arendt, storytelling reveals meaning without the error of defining it. So moving forward, there's an important piece for all of us to reclaim the story and build it forward of our therapeutic and teaching communities. The citizens of the world right now are reviewing story. Germany has made reparations to Namibia. Greta Thunberg has motivated millions of young people to examine their relationship to the planet. Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative sends out a story every single day regarding racial injustice entitled On This Day. He's calling for a new era of truth and justice and inclusion. He tells stories of slavery, of First Nations, of genocide, of Asian, Jewish, and Mexican American exclusion. Illinois has made Asian American studies a requirement in school. Jack Forbes, the Native American activist and historian, stressed that while we the living are not responsible for what our ancestors did, we are responsible for the societies that we live in, which is a product of our past. So, social context is critical. From corporate America to grassroots movements to statues of the Confederacy, we're flipping the box on America's story, and around our world, the real story of colonization is beginning to move towards a wider truth. So where's the TC today? What's our story? What story will we carry forward into our future? Today, around the world, TCs have expanded the movement to reflect many of the issues of our time. Phoenix Futures in the UK responded to a call for action from the European Federation and announced in 2019 that their TCs would be carbon neutral by 2021. They exceeded their goal, and they did it by 2020. Shimane Asahi Prison in Japan uses the TC model for restorative justice. The documentary movie on this project, called Prison Circle by Kori Sakagami, has won every prestigious award for documentaries in Japan and is impacting the national perspective on corrections. In both Australia and New Zealand, TC practitioners preface presentations acknowledging the First Nations, and those governments have included in their justice systems the concepts and practices of those that are native to their land. Much of this work has come out of the work that the TCs did there. In Greece, Katheia, the movement is so strong that TCs survived national economic collapse, and practitioners suffering pay cuts and more moved in to different campuses and helped preserve the work. In Ireland, the Coolmine TC represents perhaps one of the most robust creative centers for family and children that I've seen. In Spain, the efforts of Proyecto Hombre have transformed entire neighborhoods and thousands of families for the better. In Italy, the women of the Dianova Foundation have demonstrated humbling work with adolescents. And in Peru, we have Instituto Mundo Libre. In Mexico, El Salvador, TC concepts are addressing street children and gangs, creating organic gardens, and addressing the issues of our time, acknowledging that abandonment, abuse, criminality, addiction are symptoms of larger ills. George keeps encouraging us to re-envision our work. We have the small circle of the drug program, which of course is symptoms. We then developed the therapeutic community, which is whole person education. And part of re-envisioning, I would like to suggest to you, is that we re-envision ourselves as teaching and therapeutic communities. About 60 years ago, Zev Putterman, who is the third person on methadone in the United States, the 39th person to enter Synanon, who graduated and became the winner of 13 Emmy Awards, ran QED TV in California, believed by the 1990s, he said, we should call ourselves TC, Teaching Community, because never has there been a greater need for community. So starting in the 90s at Amity Foundation, we refer to ourselves as part of the re-envisioning process as a teaching and therapeutic community. TC, Teaching Community, a microcosm that serves as a mirror reflecting the problems of our time as they're manifested in individuals. Within the inclusive sanctuary of community, people engage in therapia, the work of the whole. Teaching and learning from each other in community accelerates learning in the emotional, intellectual, cultural, moral, and spiritual realms. Community as method. The word remember, of course, comes from the Latin root recordare, which means to pass again through the heart. Remember is the opposite of dismember. Remember, to bring back together the separated pieces. What might we remember in terms of our own story and pass one more time through our heart? Well, the original TC rejected a faith-based recovery model developed by white, well-educated men who understood powerlessness from a position of having been empowered once. The original TC revolted against the purely medical interventions of shock treatments, straitjackets, LSD experiments. The activities were referred to as self-actualizing activities and community-building activities rather than treatment. The first TC grew out of the civil rights movement. At its center were interracial relationships, which in the 1950s and early 60s were still illegal in many states in the United States. The TC was a revolution of inclusion. At its center, those early days, were those blacklisted in the McCarthy era, many who joined the ex-addicts, supporting their right to help each other and help themselves. And they too became senior professors, sharing their stories, sharing their moral compass, why they had stood up for the Scottsboro Boys, the young Mexican men charged with the Sleepy Lagoon murders. At the center of the first TC were African American women who were largely ignored in society, who found a place, a second chance, liberated into competence, running campuses, getting donations, and teaching grace notes to the youngsters. The first TC board of directors included Native American, Mexican American, African American, Jew, Gentile, and Muslim. The mission was to engage in research and investigation into the causes of personal alienation, not the symptoms, the causes. The idea was to create empowerment, transformation, self-actualization, and most importantly, community. There was the movement before there was the model. There was an essence before there was the form. There was the soul before there was structure, and there was community before there was a corporation. Each TC, at its best, has duende. Garcia Lorca tells us duende is a force, not a labor. It surges up from the soles of your feet. It's not a question of skill. It's truly alive. It's in the veins. Duende, a mysterious force that everyone can feel and no philosopher or scientist can completely explain. So will we embrace the model at the expense of the movement, the form at the expense of the essence, the structure to the degree that we lose our soul, and revere the corporate model at the expense of community? Or will we pass again through our hearts what we know to be true, the fidelity to the model, and find ways to re-envision, as George says, and apply what we know works to the people that we serve today? There are many who challenge us and say that our history is based on a shame-based model. Were there mistakes? Of course. Were there abuses in some places? Absolutely. Such is the story of any movement that's fighting the first battles for a cause. Dr. De Leon has consistently encouraged us to tell the story of our collateral benefits. This is so important, for what an insult it is to those who labored long and hard before us not to tell the whole story and allow the narrow mythology of us only being a shame-based movement to persist. Think of Ronnie Williams starting staying out and being locked in Sally Ports in prison. Think of George De Leon fighting as hard as he did for research. Judy Ann Denson Gerber testifying about heroin use with children in Harlem. Mimi Silbert staying the course for decades with Delancey Street. Mitch Rosenthal, Richard Pruss, Betty Dietrich, Oscar Camaño, Ted Dibble, Ray Dibble, Sonia Page, Lena Lindsay, Kevin McEnany, John Malhar, Louis Yablonsky, Charles Devlin, Robert Kennedy Jr., who supported the effort, Senator Thomas Dodd, Jim Inciardi, Senator Nick Petras, who defined the TCs as a place of aid, not a hospital. Many American TCs don't know their own history, let alone the history of the movement. So let us remember the thousands who stayed up night after night, helping people kick habits, encouraging them, loving them, listening to them, and mentoring to them. Challenges: corporation or community, social service, plus social justice equals social progress. Warning, warning. Exclusion rather than inclusion, competition rather than collaboration equals community destruction and the downfall of community as method. Corporate structure should exist to serve social progress and community. The triangle should be inside, the structure should be inside of the community itself. The community should continue to grow. We have wonderful applications of our model, with the corporation being supportive of it, rather than the corporation that feeds off the backs of the indigent, swallowing and destroying community in the interests of corporate need and corporate greed. Part of fidelity to the model starts with inverting the pyramid. In a corporate structure, the executives are at the top and the students coming in for help are at the bottom. If you flip that around, think about it as a funnel and the executives being at the bottom of a robust funnel of information, keeping them current to the issues that are presented by the people we serve. What is truly valued in our TCs today? A faculty member might be at the, quote, bottom of the triangle, but the core of the community. Do we bank character of acknowledging demonstration? Do we regularly write letters to the personnel files of people regarding their contribution to the community? Or do we just use our personnel files as a way of documenting mistakes? The faculty is the first community. Do we build it? Do we develop community as method amongst the faculty? To those of you who are executives, think for a moment. How many letters of commendation have you written in the last year to the TC practitioners who have mentored, saved a life, taken a risk, included a family? Membership. To promote fidelity to the model, everyone has a job, of course, but everyone in the corporate structure, everyone is a member of the community. It's not either or, it's both and. There's a reciprocal relationship. Can't have an inside of a glass without there being an outside. Do all of the employees in your TC have a membership role? Do they serve a meal once a month? Do they create a birthday party? Do they read stories to children? Marian Wright Edelman taught us that service is the rent we pay for being. It's the very purpose of life and not something that we do in our spare time. We have many challenges to consider, both internally and externally. Climate change, real nutrition. Americans are obese. We have more diabetes than most people on the planet. Certainly at Amity, our chefs have addressed this through diet. People have lost weight, reversed diabetes, and learned how to rechange their relationship to food. We can all do that. Are we addressing sex trafficking, human trafficking? Are we finding ways to make family reconciliation more robust every year? Are we looking at immigration as our faculty and students have their families shattered with deportation? Are we thinking about those orphaned by COVID? Are we thinking about early child care so that the single parents that work in our centers have places to bring their children? Are we looking at medically assisted treatment, adolescence? How are we addressing the issues and the problems that people bring with them when they come? People come to us and start working with us with large suitcases, and those suitcases have racism, homophobia, misogyny. How do we include and help people overcome those issues and buy into the concept of community as method? George touched on the issue of curriculum delivery. As we have mandated curriculums, are we finding creative ways to include the 8 essential elements and the basic assumptions that foster community as method? What are we doing in terms of our purchasing? Do we look at what we purchase so we can support climate-friendly, anti-racist corporations? Or do we just do what is convenient? How are we addressing the growing violence and those issues that are growing in our country? Thomas Oz is kind of controversial. In 2007, the last book that was published was called The Medicalization of Everyday Life. So today, we have the spectacle of thousands in the criminal justice system that are mandated onto drugs as a condition of their release and parole. Some of them are returned to custody if they come off their medication. So we have to ask ourselves, are chemical restraints in the pharmaceutical industrial complex replacing the prison industrial complex? Is this yet another face of racism disguised as a concern and public safety, quote, for people's own good? There is a place for medication, of course. There is a way to utilize medication as a bridge to wholeness, yes? Are we addressing that? Are we questioning the massive mandated distribution? Are we having these discussions, or are we going blindly down the road as we did with mass incarceration? These are issues that we need to be discussing so we can move forward and do our very best. It's a great book that was written a little while ago called Lead by Learning, and it is a key fit to the therapeutic community in so many ways. If we embrace community as method, if we embrace teaching in the therapeutic community, we have to lead by learning about who we are serving. Learning openness, learning collective leadership, learning to question, learning critical reflection, learning to support the growth of others, learning democracy, hope, learning to analyze experience, and last but really first is building community. Some years ago, Justice Douglas gave a talk and he said, "As nightfall does not come at once, neither does oppression. In both instances, there's a twilight where everything remains seemingly unchanged. And it is in such a twilight that we must be most aware of the change in the air, however slight, lest we become unwitting victims of the darkness." And here comes the question again of erosion. We have to be awake to the erosion that can happen so easily, and we have to find ways, simple ways, to keep bolstering fidelity to the model. If you're in a prison and you have a robust TC and people stand online to get into the dining room, the chow hall, give them an assignment so that people are having a conversation with the person in front of them or the person behind them. If you have a short time to eat in a residential campus, a residential TC, have quotes on the table. We started a project over a year ago where every month we have print placemats, and each placemat has a quote depending what commemorative month it is. Black History Month is famous people from the African American community. Women's Month, same thing. So that people can find different ways in the environment at all times to continue great discussion with one another and hear each other's opinions. Critical reflection. This is just one from this book, Preskill and Brookfield. Focusing thinking on mission, purpose, and service by constantly asking questions about how ideas, decisions, and actions are tied to our desire to create a more humane, equal, and just society. Holding ourselves and others accountable. Noting the gap between principles and practice. This happens to us all the time. By paying attention to what's not happening to promote the common good. By asking questions constantly about the connections between actions and principles. Critical reflection, why it matters to hold leaders accountable to what's most important, to hold all of us accountable to what is most important. Social justice, I suggest to you, is perhaps thinking about ourselves as we re-envision ourselves, thinking about ourselves leaning more towards social justice than a corporate entity. Not saying that we don't need a lot of those corporate structures, but are we a social justice entity? As places like Pepsi-Cola, who would have thought Pepsi, of all things, is changing their structure so that their highest level managers are being graded and assessed on their ability to pull together diverse teams, might we not return to that part of our roots and ensure that we are continuing on that particular march? Courage, after all, is not being unafraid, but doing what needs to be done in spite of fear. James Farmer, founder of CORE. It is not knowledge that we lack. What is missing is the courage to understand what we know and draw conclusions. Sven Lindquist. We all know deep down that something more is required of us now. What it means to walk will be different for different people. I ask myself what I need to do to walk my walk with greater courage. Michelle Alexander, of course, the author of The New Jim Crow. In the teaching community, we can look at empowerment and include how do we enroll faculty and students? What is their first impression? What is our orientation? We can think about our environment. Dr. De Leon has said that the first therapeutic intervention is the physical environment. What do our physical environments message to the people who walk into our centers? Education, from the Latin, educare, to move forth. Are we moving people forth into a larger circle of truth? Emotional literacy and intelligence. And these 4 simple things, and there are many more, add to the empowerment of the individual, of the community, and to entheos, the God or the spirit within. These are a few resources that we have found to be very useful. Obviously, anything and everything that George has ever done, books, articles, and videos, you can watch them many times, read it many times, and get something new out every time, and come up with creative ways to apply his work. And there are many more things as well. Dolores Huerta tells us every moment is an organizing opportunity, every person a potential activist, every minute a chance to change the world. And this is true for the individuals, faculty, and students that come to us. We can all be potential activists in our own lives, in our families' lives, and in our communities' lives by utilizing community as the method. And if you think perhaps that your voice doesn't matter, the Dalai Lama reminds us, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. So, more than 50 years ago, I was sitting in a federal court at 17, about to be tried as an adult, and I did receive a well-constructed chance. It really wasn't on merit. It was probably because I was white and I looked a lot more like a judge's daughter than anybody else in the courtroom that day. I've chosen to remember that day since then, but I did take my chance. And if some of you are listening to this and you have gotten a chance, take it. Don't turn your back on it. Si se puede. I was taught not only that this day was the first day of the rest of my life, but more importantly, that life was a gift not to be wasted. So, it's my hope that every single person that comes into a TC today will be able to say, decades from today, in the words of Violeta Parra, gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto. So, I will close today with the voices of some incarcerated women in a TC that no longer exists, who were engaged in community, who believed in community as a method, whose wish it was to be prodigal daughters, to be transformed, and to be welcomed home. Thank you.
For me, I never had an opportunity to get a chance to be in a community or a program.
How much time have you done?
In the system, it'll be 13 years next month.
And how long have you used for it?
27 years.
Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if somebody would have noticed when you were 14 or 15 or?
But if I got help the first time I went to prison, it would have been cool. I would have made it.
And did you go to prison for your addiction the first time you went to prison? Basically.
Basically, yes.
And there's always another reason, but
Selling
basically.
and then
Yeah.
support my own habit by selling. That's what I did. But if I had the community or a program that was like this, structured this way as far as your behavior, I wouldn't have been here now.
Mom, you were always real angry. And you were always real abusive. And I never understood why. I always thought it was something that I had done wrong. And I could, as much as I tried, I could never make you happy. But I know now that it was because of how you were brought up. And if you could have changed it, you would have. And I want to break that. I don't want my kids to have to go through the pain that I went through. And I forgive you for everything that you did, because it wasn't your fault. And I know you love me.
County
Uh-huh.
or here, when I have someone call me collect from here to home, I hear the backgrounds and I get so happy on the phone because I say, oh, they're coming from work, and I'm all excited, you know. But then when I'm home, you don't have that women-to-women bond anymore.
Right.
And you don't have the people coming up and, oh, it's so-and-so's birthday, do you want to participate? Or, you know, I don't have that when I'm out there. You know, I don't. But when you hear the background on the phone here, it does. You're not that warm feeling anymore, that you don't have it out there. I don't.
Just ran up on me all of a sudden. And I don't know where I'm at. I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know how to fix it. And I just feel really out of control. And I don't know how to do time. I don't have the slightest clue what I'm doing.
It's like, when I first came up in this mud, I told Tara, because we from the same county, and I was telling her, fuck that shit, I'm just gonna do time. And you know what I'm saying? I shouldn't have lied. God damn, I should have just turned myself in. She seen me from the stay. She seen me run on my stay. She seen me come back. And it was like, fuck that. And then she told me that I had to come to group and say all kind of bullshit. I told her, fuck that, I got the gift of gab. I'm just gonna lie. She said, you know they gonna know. No, they ain't. I'm just gonna lie. And another thing you kept telling me, you'll get that shit, you'll get it. No, I ain't. Fuck that. They just got you programmed.
No, they don't.
Shit, last month, I got the shit. I'm serious as fuck. I'm serious as fuck. I'm like, you know, fuck, it's like different things. If you just be here, you'll get something out of it and shit. And I was like, fuck, I don't want to do that shit. I don't want to be doing pull-ups. I don't want to do none of that bullshit. I don't even want to share my story. The other day, they had to cut me off. You know?